The day is July 7th, 1944. A Japanese force braces for a final assault against an overwhelming enemy on the island of Saipan. They are exhausted and almost out of ammunition. The only option afforded to them by their commander would be one last desperate charge. The tactic about to be employed by the Imperial soldiers would be the vaunted Banzai charge, or in other words, a human wave of bravery versus a wall of flying lead. The Banzai charge was a tactic used by Japanese soldiers in World War II, synonymous with the term human wave attack. The term human wave tactic can also be applied. It was a desperate, all-out attack, serving the Japanese Empire well in China against poorly equipped forces with bad leadership and low morale. But against a well-armed fighting force with high morale and competent leadership like that of the US military, the attacks proved to be futile. Soldiers would charge directly at the enemy, often with fixed bayonets. The Banzai charge was rooted in the ancient samurai code of Bushido, or certainly in a perversion of it. Bushido emphasized honor, courage, loyalty, and above all, sacrifice. It taught that surrender was the greatest shame. Never to be forgiven or forgotten by fellow countrymen, Japanese soldiers were expected to fight to the death rather than be captured. The Banzai charge was a terrifying sight. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of soldiers would scream, "Tennoheika Banzai!" It means "Long live the Emperor!" They would run towards the enemy lines, often armed only with swords or rifles. This resulted in heavy Japanese casualties. The Banzai charge became a symbol of Japanese military fanaticism, but had roots in practical military doctrine. "Over the trench, lads," was the last thing many British servicemen heard during the First World War, as thousands of men would enter no man's land, trying to overcome a wall of machine gun and rifle fire, miles of trenches, gas attacks and aircraft bombs. These outdated tactics led to the deaths of millions of Europe's finest. One would have to go back to the American Civil War, Crimea or the Napoleonic War to discover a full frontal assault into heavily defended territory where the attacker had success. Certainly. One would find cases in the Napoleonic War, specifically the final charge into the Russian-Austrian line by French soldiers at Austerlitz that turned the tide of battle. The 20th Maine's bayonet charge against Confederates at the Battle of Gettysburg comes to mind, where a human wave attack was pivotal to the outcome of the battle, the Union successfully holding Little Round Top against great odds. Although the very next day Pickett's charge, a massive frontal assault against well-dug-in Union troops, ended up losing Robert E. Lee and the Confederates a chance at victory on northern soil. The Battle of Saipan saw one of the largest and most desperate human waves of the war. It was a testament to the power of Bushido. It showed the willingness of Japanese soldiers to die for their beliefs. According to US Army analyst Edward C. O'Dowd, a human wave attack is a frontal assault by densely concentrated infantry formations against an enemy line. The goal is to maneuver as many people as possible into close range, hoping the shock from a large mass of attackers would force the enemy to disintegrate or fall back. This tactic requires great courage, coercion, or morale for the attackers to advance into enemy fire. The Soviet Union was known to use such tactics during Operation Barbarossa, a cycle that seems to be repeating itself in the Ukraine war today. However, against modern weaponry such as automatic firearms, artillery and aircraft, it is extremely dangerous and costly. For a human wave attack to succeed, attackers must charge into the enemy line in the shortest time and in the greatest numbers possible. This often means sacrificing concealment and cover for numbers and speed. Human waves were used during the Korean and Vietnam War, and even in recent conflicts like the Iran-Iraq War and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The island of Saipan is small. It's part of the Mariana Islands in the Pacific Ocean. In 1944, Saipan was a strategically important island. Japan had controlled it since World War I. The island had 2 airfields. These airfields could be used by the United States Army Air Forces. They could use the airfields to launch bombing raids on the Japanese mainland. The United States Marines landed on Saipan on June 15, 1944. The invasion was part of the Allied island hopping campaign. The goal of the campaign was to capture islands closer and closer to Japan. The Japanese defenders were outnumbered, they were outgunned. but they were determined to fight to the death. The fighting on Saipan was fierce. The Japanese used caves and tunnels to their advantage. They launched surprise attacks on the advancing Americans. The Americans slowly pushed the Japanese back. They used their superior firepower and numbers. By July 7th, the Japanese were trapped on the northern tip of the island. The Japanese forces on Saipan were led by General Yoshitsugu Saito. Saito was a career military officer. He was known for his bravery and his stubbornness. He knew his situation was hopeless, but he was determined to inflict as many casualties as possible on the Americans. He ordered his men to fight to the last man. The American forces were led by Lieutenant General Holland Smith. Smith was a tough and experienced commander. He was known as Howlin' Mad Smith for his temper and was determined to take Saipan as quickly as possible. He knew that the island was a stepping stone to the Japanese home islands. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic battles of the Pacific War. The Japanese, facing certain defeat, prepared for one final, desperate act of defiance. Their last stand would become a chilling example of courage and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming odds. On July 7, 1944, General Saito issued his final order. He told his men that the time had come to make their final stand, telling them to exert themselves to the utmost and to die with honor. At dawn, the Japanese launched their final attack. It was one of the largest Banzai charges of the war. Over 4,000 Japanese soldiers charged the American lines, led by officers waving samurai swords. Some were armed only with bayonets and grenades. The American soldiers were shocked by the ferocity of the attack. They fought back with everything they had, using rifles, machine guns, mortars and artillery. The Japanese soldiers were cut down by the American firepower, but they kept coming. In the midst of this chaos, an act of extraordinary heroism unfolded. Captain Benjamin Salomon was a battalion surgeon. He was responsible for treating wounded soldiers. As the Japanese assault intensified, Salomon found himself in a field aid station overflowing with wounded Americans. Knowing that the aid station was about to be overrun, Salomon ordered his men to evacuate the wounded. Against orders, he refused to leave his post, instead picking up a rifle and joining the fight. Salomon fought with incredible bravery. He single-handedly held off the enemy wave, allowing the wounded to be evacuated. Unfortunately, he was eventually killed, found surrounded by the bodies of 98 dead Japanese soldiers. Captain Salomon's selfless sacrifice earned him the Medal of Honor. He is remembered as a true hero of the Pacific War. Similar acts of bravery were seen during the Boxer Rebellion in China, where Boxer rebels performed human wave attacks against the eight-nation alliance forces that included America and Japan. On June 11th and June 14th, 1900, Boxers armed only with bladed melee weapons directly charged the alliance troops at Langfang. They also blocked the retreat of the expedition via train by destroying the Tianjin-Langfang railway. The Boxers and Dong Fuxiang's army worked together in a joint ambush, displaying no fear of death and engaging the Allies in melee combat. They put the Allied troops under severe mental stress by mimicking vigorous gunfire with firecrackers. The Allies suffered most of their losses at the hands of General Dong's troops, who used their expertise and persistence to engage in bold and persistent mass assaults. Although the alliance was eventually victorious, the Japanese saw for their own eyes the power of a frontal attack by dedicated men. The Banzai charge on July 7, 1944, was a testament to the bravery and the desperation of the Japanese soldiers. They fought with incredible ferocity. They suffered horrendous losses. They were ultimately unable to break through the American lines. The charge was a disaster for the Japanese. Over 4,000 soldiers were killed. The American forces also suffered heavy casualties. They lost over 3,400 men killed or wounded. The Battle of Saipan was a major turning point in the Pacific War. It gave the Americans a key base of operations. They could launch bombing raids on the Japanese mainland. The Banzai charge at Saipan stands as a stark reminder of the horrors of war. It is a testament to the courage and the sacrifice of the soldiers who fought on both sides. It also raises questions about the nature of war. It raises questions about the influence of ideology on human behavior. The charge was a product of the Bushido Code. This code was deeply ingrained in Japanese culture. It glorified death in battle. It equated surrender with shame. The code pushed Japanese soldiers to fight to the death. They fought even when there was no hope of victory. The Banzai charge was a futile tactic. It resulted in the deaths of thousands of Japanese soldiers. It did little to change the outcome of the battle. But the charge had a profound impact on the American soldiers who witnessed it, and possibly paved the way for Army Command coming to grips with the realization that an invasion of the Japanese homeland by American troops would be an extremely costly affair for both sides. The Banzai charge at Saipan was a pivotal moment in the Pacific War. It was a clash of cultures. It was a clash of ideologies. It was a stark reminder of the human cost of war. The courage of the Japanese soldiers, driven by their unwavering belief in Bushido and the Emperor, remains a haunting testament to the complexities of war. The Battle of Saipan serves as a reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict. It is a reminder of the need to strive for peace at all costs. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.